Okay, welcome. Welcome everyone to October Midstream reading. And we carry on the tradition virtually. And we are comfortable and cozy, and I hope you are as well. And we have a wonderful lineup of poets this evening with a little bit of interest in the visual connection. So we're going to broaden our scope a little bit and break down some barriers by having some technology. And I hope we don't have any issues with that as well. So this evening, we are going to welcome back Margaret Hasse and Richard Terrill, who have been part of Midstream readers for the last couple of years. And welcome back also Jonee Brigham, who had read for us a year or so ago. And we welcome Ron Palmer for the first time on board. So we are in for a wonderful evening of reading, entertainment, and thought. The next Zoom will be in November, so you can plan ahead for, I think it's November 12th, that we will have the once a month poets and a wonderful following, and we hope this will continue. So enjoy this evening together. I would like to start the evening with a special tribute to a wonderful poet, Louise Gluck. I don't know that everybody knows her work so well, but she just has been awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. And I think that's something for us to cheer about. She has been one of my very favorite poets. And if I could write like her, that would be my dream come true. So in that moment of recognition, I would like to read one of her poems from the book, The Wild Iris, and it is the book that she won the Pulitzer Prize for back in 1993. It's called The Red Poppy. The great thing is not having a mind. Feelings, oh, I have those. They govern me. I have a Lord in heaven called the sun, and open for him, showing him the fire of my own heart, fire like his presence. What could such glory be if not a heart? Oh, my brothers and sisters, were you like me once, long ago, before you were human? Did you permit yourselves to open once, who would never open again? Because in truth, I am speaking now the way you do. I speak because I am shattered. She is definitely a poet that goes deep into the soul and very concerned with her own feelings, which make you feel alive in a very interesting and perhaps a little different way. And in the tradition of the Midstream readers, the hosts introduce themselves. I'm Roslye Ultan. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Midstream readers. We decided that it was too big a job for one person to handle. So Richard, Terrill, and Mimi Jennings have jumped in, and we run the series together. And find our poets in that way. And one of the traditions is to read one of your own poems. I will read this evening a recent piece that I wrote in a series that I'm writing on nature and the inspiration of birds and trees and flowers. Lighten the burden of fear. Oh, children, when the alarm rings, crawl under your desk, hands covering your head. Stay still. Be silent. Don't fuss. You will be safe. Have a dream. Believe in the drumbeat of hope in your heart. Sing a love song. Oh, float above the clouds. Be among the stars. Make the real world disappear. Dozy-do your partner. Right, left, back, forward. Play the game of masquerade. A purple-red mask dissolving who you are. Black and white checkered pantaloons, swaying wild, gaming like a court jester. Make us laugh. Pretend you're a male harlequin, white-feathered duck, flowing in streams around the Arctic Circle, shedding blue-gray plumage, enticing your mate to mate. Oh, be daring. Rise naked in the sun. Travel through the breath around Lake Superior's North Shore. Hike to the hidden waterfalls, plunging into gorges. And oh, be unafraid to witness the thundering Temperance River carving deep paths into the rocks. And now we are going to hear the voice of one of our most treasured Minnesota poets, and that is Margaret Hasse, who has recently published a new book among her many wonderful books that have been published in recent years. Margaret Hasse was born and raised in South Dakota. After graduating from Stanford University in California, she moved to the Twin Cities to teach for an arts program in the state's correctional facilities and compass poetry in the schools program. She is currently welcoming the publication of a new collaborative book called Shelter, with watercolors by Sharon DeMark. Created during the first months of the pandemic, Shelter offers words and images of places and things that protect and comfort. She is the author of 5 other books, including Between Us, winner of the Midwest Poetry Award, and Milk and Tides, a finalist for the Minnesota Book Award. Margaret is the recipient of fellowships from the Loft Knight, the Minnesota State Arts Board, the National Endowment for the Arts, among others. She has had poems embedded in sidewalks in St. Paul and placed on posters in Metro Transit buses. Visit her website, and we have that opportunity to find out more about Margaret Hasse, and I turn the stage over to Margaret for her reading. Thank you, Margaret.
Roslye, thank you for that introduction and also for reading the Louise Gluck poem and one of your own. It's very sweet for me tonight to see so many faces of friends, and also another one of your colleagues, yours and Richard's colleagues. Mimi Jennings is here. She's a third member of the 4-member team who puts this on. But I'd be remiss to not to mention that there's really a 5th member of your team who holds it all together, and that's Paul. Do you pronounce your last name Mattis?
Mattis, yes.
Mattis, great. Paul Mattis over there, and you can see him in his expertise and his yes, and he's waving at us. Roslye mentioned that I'm from South Dakota, so I am going to begin with a South Dakota poem. I picked 7 poems to read to you tonight, including this one, which comes from the perspective of a woman farmer, and it's called The Grasshopper. Today the air smells of heated grain. She and her daughter stand by the barn. Already autumn is a place between anticipation and fear. The dry fields are full of grasshoppers. They display confidence in broad daylight, Propelled by their hind legs, they take off with a whir of wings through the high grasses. In the fable, a grasshopper's the improvident one. Nothing to eat come winter, which seems just. Where swarms darken the skies, everything is devoured. Harvest, broom straw, doll's hair. Nearby, each corn plant sprouts its tassels and soybeans dangle. A grasshopper captured in the woman's hand will spit tobacco brown. While she holds it, time spools out on the threshold of ingathering, of having or losing yield before it's secured. It is so in the Great Plains, as it is in Kenya and Ethiopia, as it has been across time, the bending of human livelihood to the unpredictable. She releases the grasshopper. It jumps onto the head of her daughter, attaching to a wave of hair like a barrette. All around is green and brown and gold. So an autumn poem to begin with, and you can hear me clearly. I can't hear anything from you, but I can see your faces, which is quite a delight. So the second poem I'm going to read to you, and the first three poems are unpublished poems, and then the second set of my little set here is 4 poems from my new book, to introduce that to you. But the second poem that has not been published, and I always think yet, I hope yet, is one in a series that I've written over the last year and a half called, the series is called Another Day of Being White, really exploring my whiteness, my various aspects of it. And this is called At Selby and Dale, at the crossroads of Selby and Dale. Another Day of Being White. In the dark, after dark, with Willie, AKA Opio, out of jail just months between his nickel and his dime. I had wheels, he was broke, directed me where his daddy was, maybe alone, maybe dope, in a basement down a stairway to a hidey hole where dice and cups slammed and black men's voices bounced and rattled like ice in a blender. A clatter of speech, jive, and hot flash fast, nothing I could understand when I entered the room except their maleness, meteoric in a black box. The sheet of sound tore as every man turned a moment of silence to size us up. Oh, not cops, just Willie with a pale hippie chick, long hair, long skirt, forgettable like an ad for plain white rice. Then the men blended back into their game like a swirl of what I thought but shouldn't say smoke, except one older man who slipped something to Willie, turned to me and said softly, "This is no place for you, now be gone." And the third poem, thank you, Pat. Hi, Pat. A third poem is called Summons. And just so you know, it does have elements of autobiography in it, as did the last one. And the child or the son who is referred to in this, I read him the poem before reading it to you, bringing it to you tonight. And he said, I see it a different way. That isn't the reason I was angry with you. But he thought it was a good poem. It felt really right as a poem in itself, even though he didn't think it applied so directly to him in certain ways. Summons. One early morning with a few strangers, white, black, brown, I walk in silence to the crossroads where George Floyd died. It's filled with flowers, balloons, blankets, stuffed bears, and among many, this handmade sign. All mothers were summoned when George Floyd called out for his. My thoughts are with my son, who sizzles with angry words, not just for the cop who arrested him last week for breaking curfew, handcuffing him with zip ties, 2 loops on 1 strap, preset, as the police website says, to facilitate speedy application. It turns out he's angry at me because I adopted him, or maybe because I'm white like the cops and he is brown. He refuses therapy, is moving out in the middle of the pandemic with no plans of where to live. At home, in another shadowy dawn, a family of crows argue. Soon it will be light enough to see how the maple hangs her head over the grass. I can't imagine the future for my son. So I look backward to see a small boy's beautiful body walking into a swim pool on tiptoe. As the water gets deeper, he points his nose up like a fox smelling the air. He has always been audacious and brave. It's something to hold on to. So now I'm going to turn to a very different type of poem and type of book. It's a book that was written in 4 months, as Roslye said, in collaboration with a watercolor artist named Sharon DeMark. And when we were both sinking with the unease of COVID and some political abysses as well, we contacted one another and wanted to buoy up our spirits and support one another in creativity and community by sharing our artwork back and forth. And we took as our theme, the theme of shelter, because we were sheltering, we were isolated, but we wanted to think of shelters as safe places, as protective, as cozy. And so every week, once or twice a week, Sharon would send me a watercolor and I would respond, or I would send her a poem about a shelter I wanted to write about, and she would respond with a watercolor. So that's the way that the collaboration worked, and until we got 30 shelters that in word and watercolor that have made a book. So I'll show you the cover of the book and then read one of the first poems, among the first poems in the book, and then show you the image that Sharon made to respond. Is that visible to you all? Paul, you'll have to tell me. Put me a thumbs up. Oh, he's nodding.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
so that's the cover of the book. And while you see the shelter with the blue eggs in it, I'm going to read you a poem called Bivouac that's from the book, and then show you Sharon's response to it, because we weren't thinking of it as at all as illustrative of the other's work, but an inspiration to take the idea of that shelter in any direction that we chose. So I sent her this poem called Bivouac. Well, it wasn't called Bivouac at the time. I think it was called A Wilderness Shelter. And we renamed things and made the title simpler later. In the dream, he's once again a boy in the forest, encircled by tall trees, alone to fend for himself, forage for kindling, start a fire, unpack his survival kit, prepare for the night by building a cone-shaped shelter with long tree limbs, tips of evergreen branches, and dry leaves to make a bed. All his life, he'll love the smell of crushed pine needles. As he falls asleep, he remembers to thank the trees. So her response, I sent this off to her, and about a week later, she sent me this watercolor in response to it. So they appear side by side on the page. Whichever artwork or poem began the collaboration is on the left-hand side. So I initiated that pair, and if she began the collaboration, it would be, her artwork would be on the left-hand side. So in the next image you're going to see, she sent me this first. So she was thinking of this as a shelter. And so I started to think, what is a shelter there? Well, of course, it's sheltering in a book, which all of us are book people. So you might appreciate this poem that's a list poem called, we ended up giving all of the shelters 1 or 2 word titles. So this is book. Remember Saturdays you read stories when it rained? The night you stayed up late to finish a book about a horse that made you cry at the end? Remember picture books that included boys and girls that looked like you? The book you read with a flashlight in a tent, its mesh vents open to the stars? You became open to the stars. Remember the heavy book you wrapped in plastic and carried to school in the snowstorm? The book boarded like a boat to a surprise party, the one claimed from the cove of a little free library, the one you didn't know you needed until you received the gift. And the poetry book, where each poem was like the fragrance of a flower. Later, you found out about Mars mysteries and the way to plant potatoes. You learned words like potpourri and Weltschmerz. You traveled to places like the Bight of Biafra and Renaissance England, hearing voices. Oh, so many voices. You loved a book you wore ragged and bought another copy to fill with margin notes. You keep returning to that small tan book where you found your soul. So in 4 months, we had 30 poems and 30 artworks that went back and forth between us, which was top speed. And we were worked hard on the quality of the work as well as the quantity. This one Sharon sent me, and I had to think about it and puzzle over it for a while. This again was initiated by the watercolor artist and Sharon DeMark and my friend. And I did a little research on it because she told me it was from the Tenement Museum, which I had visited also in New York City and Manhattan, which is a museum that may not make it through the pandemic in terms of its financing. But it was so interesting to visit there and walk down the very dark corridors and look into these incredibly tiny rooms where Sharon said many members of her family who emigrated lived for quite a while before they spread out across the country. So this poem and the painting, we call them both tenement. And this is a prose poem. As tourists, we're shepherded down a warren of dim hallways, peer into open doors. History, in the voice of Tatiana, our tour guide, adopts a brisk tone. By 1900, some 2.3 million immigrants were living in tenement housing like this in New York City. A family of 10 might occupy 325 square feet of space. We try to picture where they put their clothes. How could they sleep, laid out like logs on the floor? We think of our closets, our palatial mattresses. Tatiana continues, no running water, 1 outhouse for 20 residents. Someone's distant cousin Bridget fled the great hunger to here. Uncle Max left pogroms in Russia and 4 family graves. They're among those who found their first residence in a big new country, overcrowded, thin-walled, unvented. We stare into tight rooms that house so many lives, see signs of punishing poverty, but also aspiration and domestic care in daisies, embroidered on the tablecloth, a book marked with a ribbon, the chipped blue pitcher for fetching water. And then one last one to close out my round before you get to meet my wonderful colleagues that I'm part of this event tonight with. Ron will read next, I believe, Jonee, and then Richard. But this is one of the whimsical of the shelters that we made. Sharon sent it to me with a note saying, I was out walking and down by the river, and I came across this little tiny house. It's about the size of a bird's house, because of course, after she told me about it, I went to find it there in a spot that she drew a map for, and somebody had just left this tiny mouse house there, and it says Mouse Sanctuary. So we felt we needed to put the mouse house in the book as something sort of whimsical that lifted our spirits as walkers during the pandemic. Mouse house. To most mice, a pile of brush in the woods or a dark corner of a garage is home. But to one mouse has been given a minute wooden A-frame with a portico roof over the entrance. After Stuart Little drove north out of the pages of E.B. White's book, perhaps he found his friend Margolo in Minnesota and retired here in this wonder of the mouse real estate world, situated on prime property in Hidden Falls, near a stream that slips by like a dream. And that is it for me, folks. Thank you for staying with me during those 7 poems. And I'm stopped sharing to get back to share the stage with the next, with Roslye again. Share the little, what do we call ourselves here? Little tiles, our little tiles. Roslye, thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Margaret. That was wonderful, and wonderful to see the imagery, and what a lovely way of working in another discipline into the poetry, and the way you juxtapose them in the right and the left, and who came first and who came second. That was very nice. Thank you so much. We'll go on to our next reader, and that is a new introduction, Ron Palmer, a person who I met a number of years ago when we were in different workshops around the city of Minneapolis. And we have both gone in different ways and developed in wonderful, wonderful directions in terms of our writing. So Ron, welcome to Midstream. It's a pleasure to see how far you've come. Ron begins his journey on the streets in Bloomington, Minnesota, where he has been writing poetry, sometimes, not always, on and off for the past few years. He comes up with his best lines while walking his Siberian huskies, being greeted by neighbors with, "Hey, how's it going?" or "Not in my yard." He's the author of the book Dogged, published by Potter's Wheel Publishing House. He has been published in Talking Stick, Shark Reef, a literary magazine, Martin Lake Poetry Journal in 2017, and the White Wall Review, among others. He was a consulting editor for the 2019 and 2020 editions of the Martin Lake Journal. So Ron, we welcome you and want to hear all about your Siberian Huskies. And come this summer, I'm planning a trip to Siberia with an exhibition. So I would like very much to talk further about Siberia and its puppies. So Ron, thank you for joining us this evening.
And thank you, Roslye, for inviting me, and Paul Mathis for informing me on how to get on. I think it's wonderful that the people involved have continued David Shove's reading series. I think it's a great asset to the Twin Cities. My book Dog was recently published in August. It is available on Amazon. Quite a few of the poems have a dog in it. The idea for the book came about, I was at an open reading once, and a fellow poet mentioned to me that I should put all my dog poems collected in one single book since they seem to be crowd favorites. I'm going to start reading a few poems from the book Dog, and then I'll read some other poems. First poem, A Disarray of Crows. Was it the wind or the barking of dogs? A disarray of crows overhead. A scattering of kisses, flaps in the air like wings. The parking lot empty, leaving me, a lone figure embracing dust. This next poem is about how it is to be a dog owner. It's called Dog Hair. Yes, I am one of those who refer to their dogs as kids. They're my girls, my care. On Saturday mornings, Valerie will wake me up like any child hoping to go to the park. Trinity, like the old lazy older sister, raises an eye waiting to see if it's worth getting up. A husky and a lab husky mix. They sure do like their walks. And like any parent, I like hearing a neighbor or a stranger comment how beautiful, how well behaved they are. Like any parent, I know how well behaved they're sometimes not. A person comes our way, the dog jumps towards, happy to meet, hoping for a pat or a treat. During feeding time, Valerie will leap and twist like a young ballerina, while Trinity will jump in excitement like a child seeing a pile of birthday gifts. We play tag or throw the ball around. Then there is the dog hair, being that they're shedding northern breeds. Vacuum cleaners wear out in our house. Lint rollers help, but wherever I go, some strand of fur remains on my clothes. I wear that hair like any proud father would wear a badge made from a child's hand. This is another poem from Dog. It's called A Brief Glimpse. Somewhere in the frozen clear, a bird chirps, then a police siren sounds, which Trinity imitates with her howl, as if in response. Neither the chirp nor the siren arrives to our yard. I glance at the repairs for which I have neither time nor money. Recently, I was invited to a party, a rare occurrence, and found some people have happy lights. One can see the hanging gutter, a birch tree halfway cut down. The night quiets, and Trinity noses to be inside. I hope not due to disappointment. I glance again over this yard. Failure is simply a measurement. I threw my rulers away long ago. There will be time to face the losses wishful thinking can't prevent. Now it's time to put water in Trinity's dish. This poem kind of deals with the downside of owning dogs. A howl is missing. Shiloh no longer curls in the snow. No longer the husky smile greets for a treat. A decision forced by cancer. There is quiet now. A howl is missing when I walk in the door. May the next cold snap, the next snowfall, bring her spirit gently down like flakes. This is a short poem with a long title. Poem for a woman who walks her dog by my house daily. Sometimes we even chat. I started to write a poem about you. Decided better not to pursue. I have a wife, you a boyfriend, plus you are at oldest half my age. I had a beginning but not an end, a sentiment with no way to send. I numbered all I could not do. Thought best not to write a poem about you. And this poem was written with a bunch of poems that I wrote around February when the weather was thawing and going back to winter and going away from winter, that kind of stuff, and kind of an interaction of me perceiving the weather and how my dog reacted to it. The thaw was shortly held. There was no need to shovel on that foggy day a week ago. Water was becoming apparent. It dripped from the gutter. It dripped in our hearts and souls. along with making an appearance in the front hallway, drops from our clothes. The ice spirit would spring back to our lives, and the wind blowing our breath a week would return the snow spirit. No sculptures this time, just places to slip. Where do these spirits come from? They ride in on the waves, almost seen. You can't say you truly believe their presence to be more than a trick of the eye, but you don't deny. The dog jumps in the air as if to snap at him, then sticks her nose in the snow, looking for what was lost. She knows they don't perform their dances for us. And then I'm going to read a few other poems that are not in dog. A version of this poem was in Minnesota Voices this year that the Wandena County Historical Society puts out. I think they put it out every year. It's called Perspective 2019. Visiting Duluth and walking along the rocky shoreline, we meet a family with small shovels, combing the water, looking for agates and sea glass. They show us what they found so far. I wonder why, in 62 years, the waves of disappointment and discontent have not polished me. We came this far, like many, to see the fall colors, as the trees start to shed their disguise. I have lost hair and pride, and now what hair remains is a different color, not the brilliance of these red and golds. We visit the Glensheen mansion to see elegance most lives do not live in, and of how such wealth inspired murder. Except for the shoreline, I would not want to live in such excess. I then realized I have no right to complain, as many lives are touched with soot and ashes worse than mine. I wonder why I look back, not at the hardships I overcame, not at the times I felt no pain, but at the time the waves' attractions called. Come to us. More than agates can be found, more than agates can be lost. I've been working on a series of alliterative poems, and this is so far the most famous of them. F is for Frank. His discussions were always without frills. Frank liked to face facts. He knew at 15 that nothing fantastical was in his future. He had failed to be born as the second coming of a Messiah, or even King Arthur for that matter. This frustrated Frank, and he was frantic for a while. But that desire was long forgotten, having decided to forge ahead with a fondness for faltering. He decided he had no flair for fame, his fate an unfortunate fountain of fleeting flops. Yet he felt no need for frowns, having figured there is no use in flavoring his flaunts with a touch of forlorn. Besides, he had fortified his life with fancy feline friends. This was the poem that was in the Martin Lake Journal 2017 edition, I think. Recollection from a pickup bar in Oz. The way the West Witch wore that black dress was wicked. To her, the word bitch was a compliment. She was into pointed hats, shoes sharp at the toes. It was rumored men burned for her like fire on straw. Rumored that men, proud as lions, cowered, hoping for attention. A straight-laced girl from Kansas melted her heart, it is told, or made her green with envy. But there are other reasons one turns to drink and the false promises of a wizard. Some say anger saved her, and she now rides the sky, leaving smoke signals from her flight to warn all who may long for her. Yes, I made a play for her once, my heart hard as a woodsman. But here I sit with beer and tears, old and rusty, needing to be oiled simply to move. And then for my last poem, considering that was October, I thought I'd read this one. October Chance Meeting. I swear I saw walking in tandem along the desolate river bank my lost love and a pallid phantom. Such a vision made my heart go faint. She looked at me, I could not believe. Her eyes no tint, but they had a taint. She told me not to worry or to grieve, as she discovered cause to rejoice from the common life she did leave. Dust spiraled from the rasp in her voice. She introduced her friend as Adam, the darkness now her hallowed choice. Was this encounter truly random? So much in life I cannot fathom. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ron. That was really, really wonderful. Thank you very much. I like your voice, and I think your subjects are opening us up to different kinds of feelings and sympathies, and I think it's very needed. Too bad you couldn't bring some of your dog friends for show and tell tonight. Did you? I'm
They're
sure.
over on the couch. I can bring them over. They'll make a lot of noise.
Well, we need some of that to jostle things up a little bit. Well, thank
Although I
you.
have to admit, I don't like disturbing them when they're quiet.
Yeah, that's true. It's like waking up a baby when they're sleeping
Pretty
because
much.
they have to eat. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have two more wonderful voices to hear this evening. Jonee Brigham and Richard Terrill, and we will now turn the presentation stage over to Jonee Kulman Brigham, a person that I met a few years back. She was in one of my classes at the university, and it's just been such a beautiful journey to follow her development, her path, her amazing originality, and in all the amazing things that she's done for nature and the environment. So Jonee is an artist, an educator, and a writer at Full Spring Studio, LLC in Maplewood, Minnesota, where she creates work that explores the connection and flow between people and the rest of nature. Her poetry has been published in the River Images Journal, and it threads throughout her art, carved in cedar in a public work at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, engraved in chrome-plated brass in St. Louis Park, sung by children on a riverboat, accompanied by accordion in a water march, recited on a pontoon in the middle of a lake journey, acted out in a university classroom, printed as the text of her artist's books, and spoken as the script for her video poems. She is currently preparing a chapbook of poetry at Telling Feather Press. Jonee's work will be included in an interactive environmental and art exhibit in Novosibirsk, Siberia in 2021. And I'm delighted to be part of that and the organizer of that connection that we are making with the community in Siberia. So to warm our hearts, Jonee, you have the stage.
Thank you. Thank you, Roslye. And thank you for inviting me. And so the poetry I write is, Roslye maybe alluded to, is sometimes I write it directly as a response to an experience, as directly as text. And other times I write it in response to artwork or integrated with artwork. Sometimes I make an artwork and I realize it needs a poem here. And I wrote a poem, almost a working poem, I would say, to fill a role within a larger work. So I've been exploring lately the form of video poem, and I have 4 examples to show you, and I'm going to just set them up here. Okay. All right, so the first one is called Big Stone Lake Stories, and it was inspired by an experience in an art residency I did in Western Minnesota in 2018, where I was leading campers on a journey through their watershed along the shores of Big Stone Lake at Bonanza Education Center. And it wasn't originally planned to be part of this week-long journey composition, but partway through the week, I was sitting on a dock along the shore, and I was just feeling a need to sort of integrate all the things we were learning about Big Stone Lake and all the people we were meeting who were telling us about its history, glacial history, native history. And so I wrote a poem on the spot, and then I recorded the video on the spot, basically the second reading of the poem. And so I want to tell you a little bit about the lake, because it's really written in response to some of the features of the lake, and I think it'll help you understand it. Big Stone Lake is 26 miles long. It's about a mile wide, and it's on the southern side of the bump on the western edge of Minnesota. It forms the border between South Dakota and Minnesota at that point. It's very near the Lake Traverse Indian Reservation, home of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate. It was formed by Glacial Lake Agassiz when it burst through the ice dam and formed Glacial River Warren that basically formed the Minnesota River Valley of 5 miles wide. And it's the headwaters of the Minnesota River. So the children and I were learning all of this from people in the community. And after I recorded this, then the next day, in the midst of the journey, on a pontoon in the middle of the lake that was mentioned earlier, it was recited kind of at the midpoint of all these intersections. So I'm gonna just play it here.
Big Stone Lake Stories. How is a lake that is also a river, so many stories all at once, a home, a place embodied as a body of water, with its head waters born of a glacier, bursting through the dam, itself glacier formed. Beyond our sensation is such force that carves a valley miles wide, laying ancient fish in its river bottom that now leap from the fields with scales of corn. We bite into them with salt and butter. What stories are a lake that is also a river, a lake that's a line that's a path of a river that had no name until we called it Warren, a lake who know its own stories before we were here. What stories are a lake that is also a river? A lake that's a line that's a border dividing two states? A lake that's a line at the middle of a watershed connecting two states? What stories are a lake that is also a river? A lake that's a body. The shores are its hide, and we, upon a dock, upon a pier, or further by boat, by canoe, we draw near to her, and her waves whisper, Mine, and her waves whisper, shh, shh. And the quiet makes the fish feel safe, and they draw near with scales like corn, and we bite into them with salt and butter. Such stories are a lake that is also a river. Such stories are a lake that is also our home.
Okay. And that one is probably the least produced of all the videos. It's almost like a vlog, I would say, a kind of memoir of a experience in a place. The next one is called Dig. And Dig was a poem written in conjunction with a week-long artist retreat on making digital artist books. And so we're combining imagery and poetry, and this was all happening during the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, which lasted months, as you may remember. Then 10 years later, this last spring, I decided for the 10-year anniversary of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill to take the images from the artist book and the poetry and create a video poem. That's not part of it. I'm gonna just bring it back to a little bit, let it buffer.
Sleeping. Here lies a buried stream. Here lies a fire waiting. Here lies a kettle's steam. Dig. Spilling up the riverbed. Soiled birds, 11 dead. Spilling under tidy lawns, to the players, to the ponds. Dig. Dig into the blackened soil. Dig down to the pipeline deep. Lay down with the secret fire. Pray the Lord our soul to keep. Dig. From below, a dream is forming, phantoms floating up to air. From below, the truth is spilling. Sound the sirens, light the flare.
The next one, called Earthrise, is one that I actually read at Midstream a little over a year ago. And in 2019, I wrote the poem and created a two-dimensional artwork that you can kind of see in the preview here. And then as the 50th anniversary of Earth Day approached, I wanted to turn it into a video poem. And for this one, I collaborated with my son, Samuel Brigham, who is attending tonight. Hi, Samuel. And he's a video artist, and I have ideas about video, but he knows how to beautifully craft a video. And so we collaborated on this, where he took a two-dimensional drawing I had and kind of disassembled it digitally so it could start to move and come to life, and brought audio dimensions in. And so here it is. Oops, starts
Earthrise.
Oh. There.
Earthrise. Beyond the large white belly, her head crowns, 1968. She wonders why we have left her for the moon, never satisfied. She knows she is our mother. Even when we travel far and make her small, even when we take her trees to make our nest, not seeing how we rest in her, how all our takings enlarge her. We think we conquer when we steal what she is giving. She knows we are her children.
All right. The final poem is really a suite of 4 put together in a single video, but they're all really the same subject. They're very connected. I had a nature encounter in 2015 and wrote about it in my journal, made a sketch that's used as the imagery in the video poem. And I wrote a prose poem based on my journal entry, and then I found myself wanting to distill it more and more. And so it led to a rhymed shorter piece, and then to yet a shorter free verse, and finally a haiku. And this is also a collaboration with my son. I storyboarded and had ideas, and then worked with Samuel to craft and develop the themes, including some bird song that is kind of a musical motif, another voice in the poem.
Winter's young. I was feeling in need of faith as I drove into the parking lot on the sunny March morning. I pulled into a parking spot, one of many that were open, and I saw a sign centered in the parking space. Not a parking sign. It was a nest sitting on a shrub, tilting a little outward, as if it were presenting itself. A little mound of snow in the sunshine, sitting within an abandoned nest on a shrub. I saw its powerful image. I wondered what it meant. I could feel that it was a sign smiling on me, nurturing young, nurturing water, frozen water, delicate, temporary, soon to hatch to snowmelt. Its sacred appearance to dissolve into water. Dispersed water, formless, permeating everything and everywhere, yet so much throughout the environment that we don't recognize it. Winter is young. How fragile cold this egg of snow, laid gentle in the empty nest. How brief it lays before the hatch, when spring disturbs its winter's rest. How delicate this moment's form that melts into eternity. No help to give except to watch and whisper words of poetry. Winter's young. Egg of snow laid in empty nest before the hatch, before spring's disturbance. A moment's form to melt into eternity. Only watch and whisper poetry. Winter's young. Empty nest, snow egg. Brief moment before spring's hatch. Watch, whispering words.
So those are them. Thank you.
Jonee, thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you for exploring and expanding and integrating poetry and art and technology What a wonderful, wonderful introduction to the possibilities that are endless in the arts. And thank you, Daniel. Cheers for being part of making your mother's work expandable. It was really very special. Thank you. Thank you. And now we have the final concluding chapter of this evening's presentation, and we welcome Richard Terrill, whose newest book is What Falls Away is Always, Poems and Conversations from Holy Cow Press. He's the author of 5 previous books, including Coming Late to Rachmaninoff, winner of the Minnesota Book Award for Poetry, and Saturday Night in Voting, a China Memoir, winner of the Associated Writing Program's Award for Nonfiction. Terrill has been awarded fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Wisconsin and Minnesota State Arts Boards, the Jerome Foundation, the McDowell Colony, and the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, as well as 3 Fulbright fellowships. We can't really go further than this. His work has appeared in journals such as Iowa Review, Georgia Review, North American Review, Missouri Review, Rivertooth, New Letters, Fourth Genre, and Crazy Horse. He's professor emeritus at Minnesota State Mankato, where he was distinguished faculty scholar. Wow, Richard, that is quite an amazing, amazing dossier. And we are honored to have you here as part of Midstream. And I hope many, many more Midstreams will get to know your work. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Roslye. Going last, I thought, and I'm going to read all poems from my new book, What Falls Away is Always, holycowpress.org if you want to order, or go to my website, get the commercial out of the way first, richardterrill.com, and I can send you a signed copy. I thought that going last, I knew that it would be a little later, so I thought I'd start with some lighter things from the book. When I was teaching in Poland, I saw that when they played foreign movies on Polish TV, they didn't use subtitles and they didn't dub the movies. Instead, they kept the original soundtrack and just had a guy in Polish, an announcer, read all the parts, and which was kind of strange. So when I saw the original Cape Fear with Robert Mitchum, 1960, Gregory Peck, I think it was Lee Remick was the female lead. And the movie was, of course, American film, was dubbed in Italian. And then there was this Polish guy reading all the parts. Very strange. So this poem is called Cape Fear. And it starts with an epigraph that tells you pretty much what I just told you. The prevailing method in Poland is pseudo-dubbing, where one announcer speaks loudly over the original soundtrack, reading the entire script regardless of the age, sex, or emotions of the character. Cape Fear. I'm watching the original back at the hotel, dubbed in Italian and broadcast on Polish TV. Roberto Mitchum, Gregorio Peck, the Italians mismatched to American lips. Polsku smothered over the soundtrack like pickle relish on prosciutto, narration flat as a bureaucrat's memoir. Martino Balsamini meets Gregor Petchak and hands him a cold one. Cześć, grazie amico. It's closing time at the bistro 60 years ago, the band insisting on its 3-chord message, and Robert Mitchum now centered in the frame. How like the Tavernsky from which I've just returned, near the gates of the old city, with its shadows and angles perpetually under renovation. Mitchum eyes a redhead. The film is black and white. Her hairdo puffed and stuck, eyebrows sharp enough to break skin. Mitchum, the only one in the film who speaks American. Her will reduced to the foam on his beer. Baby, I just don't care. Chest of a peasant, striped shirt like a gondolier, wavy hair like somebody's Uncle Cliff before the war. Later, he eyes Peck's nubile daughter and crushes another beer can, says something no Pole would ever say, or an Italian might, but to a much older girl. That's the politically incorrect poem for this evening. I thought we should have one. You can blame it on Mitchum. He was the tough guy, you know. Since this is a poetry loving audience, I know that you're all familiar with the famous villanelle by Elizabeth Bishop, The Art of Losing. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day except the fluster of lost Dorky. She loses this, she loses that. Well, I've written a parody of Bishop's poem, and mine is called The Villanelle is Hard to Master. The art of complaining isn't hard to master. So many things seem worthy of contempt. Mere honesty about them is no disaster. Be grumpy every day. Don't just accept the fluster of cheery coworkers vying to become saints. The art of gossip isn't hard to master. Then practice bitching louder, breaking plaster, cursing names, outrageous bills, the soaring rent. Don't try to make cashmere what's polyester. The guy who gloats about Trump, clock the bastard. Even your ex-therapist said it's good to vent. The art of violence isn't hard to master. If people don't like it, who gives a piaster? It's your life taking on water, so don't relent. To breach the dam of restraint brings someone else disaster. Even pissing off you, reader, with my one-fingered gesture. Hey, I presented sound evidence. The art of complaining's not too hard to master. Never give up? Screw it, life's a disaster. I did a radio interview a couple months ago, and the interviewer says, "Is that your life philosophy? Is that your philosophy of life?" And I said, "No." I said, "Don't be that way. Don't be that way." So I'm going to read a series of poems that are actually scattered throughout the book, but I think of them as a series, and so let's say a sequence of poems. And maybe if they were all together, you could label them as Theodore Roethke did in one of his sequences in the far field. He called it sequence, sometimes metaphysical. So this maybe is kind of a philosophy of life in part. And each of these poems borrows as its title a line from another source, hence the conversations in the title of my book. So the first one of these borrows line from the poet Robert Dana, the late Robert Dana, a friend of mine, Iowa Poet Laureate, great soul. And he had this wonderful line, which I've used as the title. My life is not important. I understand that. Someone spills the deck under the table, picks up almost every card, and the game goes on. You couldn't know you'd need that 3 of spades to fill your straight an hour later. So it is, you can't draw a line through what you think is unimportant and be left neatly with a few days last February, the snow almost gone, but the temperature still well below normal, whatever that means now. You can be left, though, with the sense that something is passing daily, hourly, and you just dally like an apple on a branch. You can be left with your wish simply to be left alone. You will be, one day, the house of your life finally quiet. Pretend the house, even now, is that calm. Imagine the rain has ended and the porch is almost dry. Like the dog that's made his rounds about the room and settled back in the spot from which he rose, you remember mostly what you can't let go of, what you have always done, you must do again. This one borrows as its title a line from Andy Warhol, the pop artist of the 60s. And he famously said, "I like boring things. I like boring things." A few years after graduation, I saw my college mentor at a campus showing of a European art film when schools still showed movies like that. Ones in which a woman disappears just after the opening credits on some island all bare rock in a blue European sea, and the other characters abandon a perfectly good cocktail party to search for her. The director wanted to violate the viewer's expectations and did it so well, no one ever stayed awake for one of his films again. After the show, yawning and ready for the bar, not yet 25, I told my professor, much older it seemed, maybe 50, that I'd been playing in an R&B band, staying out all night, reading some, but more or less wasting my life. When you get to be my age, he offered, you find you can have wasted part of your life and not miss much. Because I believed him, I kept watching those European movies about painters or about composers or writers, the ones that said more things happen to artists than ever happened to the rest of us. Movies that made us feel guilty for having spent our lives on foolishness. Let's see, how much time do I have here? Oh, what the heck. I'll read this one. This is a line from the movie mogul Samuel Goldwyn, who apparently was not a very nice guy. And he said, I've actually found this in the View from the Loft, which is this magazine probably some of you used to get. They used to send out a little tabloid every month. And they had it in a little box. And it said, Samuel Goldwyn said, "No one should write their memoirs until after they're dead." That's a little harsh. But with the hindsight of the grave, your mother's shoplifting, your father's girlfriends, the last great war and all the little wars tagging along, the stray bullets in the tough parts of town that find toddlers playing in their front yards, all may start to coalesce into a paraphrasable something. Why write it down in life and risk misunderstanding and no end to the narrative arc besides? As for your own minor longing, table grade dissatisfaction, garden variety loneliness, the 3 marriages, the prosthetic heart, the etc., just leave them in boxes under the stairs to be found or not by descendants. Your epitaph to carry one last good joke. It was not as bad as he thought it was going to be. The catch is, I guess, you have to be alive to do the marketing of whatever book you write. And if you can't market your life, you sold your soul for a lot less than you could have gotten for it. So that's a poem for Margaret and all of those of us with new books. You got to stay alive to sell the book. Is that cynical? No. I'm gonna conclude with two prettier poems, and they the lines I borrowed, I think, are 2 of my I think my favorite lines, among my favorite lines of poems of the last part of the last century American poems. And the challenge with this is to make the poems as good as the titles, and you really can't if you love the titles. So here's this one from Tom Clark, the poet Tom Clark. Like musical instruments abandoned in a field, the parts of your feelings are starting to know a quiet. Sadness has toned it down. Joy has clammed up entirely. Longing is starting to keep things a little more to herself. The field in question is timothy grass, wild raspberry taking over along the edge that gets the most sun. There might be a few poplar shoots reminding us this meadow will be seedlings long before it's a repository for love, anger, grief, or indifference. It's a shame only about those musical instruments left behind. Some poor kids could be playing them in the school band. Okay, I know the poet is just making metaphor, which is a kind of joke for smart people. Indifference is not a bass clarinet. Weeping is not a cymbal crash. Anger isn't scored for brass, as right as that sounds. And love, that snob, pretends it's too good for any music we could make. And this last one, I forgot to thank Roslye and the audience, all the fellow readers. I'm trying not to go too long because I know Zoom is taxing on people's attention spans. This last one from one of my teachers in grad school, the poet John Anderson, poet. It's called, here's the line again that I try to match. I'd like, please, to leave on your sill just one cold flower whose beauty would leave you inconsolable all day. In hindsight, what you long for seems part of some canon, items on a list everyone was supposed to have wanted. Or like a scene from a silent movie screened in a noisy bar, crowded with people younger than you, intent on something you don't remember the particulars of. It is as if that disease of longing was judged incurable by the medical panel at the Institute. Then the doctors all died, while all the test patients outlived them by 10 or 20 years. You don't mind. For gradually, at around 50 maybe, when your narcissistic worry about love morphed into a narcissistic awareness of death, there came the sense that something had already passed without passing in sight, like a train, the sound of which on still nights conjures the whole of travel, the speed and freight danger along tracks, through the shoddy woods and through the bad parts of town, clothes factories with shattered window glass, a here and an elsewhere, and no matter which is which. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Bravo. Bravo, Margaret, Hasse. Bravo, Ron Palmer. Bravo to Jonee, Brigham, and bravo, Richard Terrill. It was a very, very magical, enlivening, rich exploration of poetry and imagery and all kinds of amazing original possibilities. Thank you. And Paul, Paul Mattis, we couldn't have done it without you. Thank you for all your time, your dedication, and making this all very possible for all of us and our audiences.